He had everything: money that never ran out, walls made of glass that touched the clouds, and a name that opened every door in the city. But as the snow fell quietly over New York, his mansion stood silent. No laughter, no music, just the echo of his own footsteps across marble floors. Every window shimmered with golden light, but inside, it felt cold. He could buy every luxury in the world, except someone to say Merry Christmas to. They called him Ethan Reed, the man who conquered business, technology, and time itself. But no one knew that behind those million-dollar smiles in magazines was a man who hadn't shared a dinner table in years. So, on one lonely December night, with the city alive beneath his feet and a heart quietly breaking in his chest, Ethan made a decision that would change his life forever. He would disappear, leave behind the suits, the money, the headlines, and step into the world as a man with nothing. Before we begin, tell us which city you're watching from, and don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 at the end. And if you're already feeling the warmth of this story, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who needs a little hope this Christmas. And subscribe for more heart-touching stories every day. Because tonight, you're about to witness how a millionaire discovered the real meaning of love. Ethan Reed had built an empire from nothing. The kind of success people only dream about: tech startups, skyscraper offices, luxury cars, and a penthouse that looked down on the city like a glass throne. Yet on Christmas Eve, his world was silent. The city sparkled beneath him, families gathered, music floated through the streets, but inside his mansion, there was only the soft hum of the central heating, and the distant ticking of a clock that no one ever reset. He sat in his office surrounded by awards, screens, and empty wine glasses. His assistant had sent a reminder about the annual Christmas party, but he cancelled it without a word. There was no point. Who would he celebrate with? His phone lit up every few minutes: business emails, stock alerts, investment updates, but not a single message that said, Merry Christmas, Ethan. He walked to the window and stared at the city lights stretching endlessly below, trying to remember the last time he had laughed without thinking about profit. Then, in a moment of restless impulse, he picked up his old photo album. Dust scattered into the air as he opened it. There they were, his parents, smiling in front of a small Christmas tree, wrapping paper on the floor. His younger self holding a toy car. The house was tiny, the tree crooked, but the happiness in those faces was something money had never been able to recreate. He turned another page. His father carving a turkey, his mother wearing that silly red sweater with blinking lights. He remembered how their laughter used to fill every corner of the room. Before the business deals, before the fame, before the walls of glass and marble replaced the warmth of home. His eyes lingered on one photo longer than the rest, him between his parents, his small hands clutching theirs. The caption on the back read, Our best Christmas yet. A faint smile touched his lips, then faded just as quickly. He closed the album and leaned back in his chair, the silence of the mansion pressing down on him like a weight. For the first time in years, he admitted something to himself. He had built an empire, and in the process, tore down every bridge that led back to love. Outside, snow began to fall, covering the city in white. Ethan whispered softly, as if confessing to the night itself, Maybe I'll find out what it's like to have nothing again. The next morning, Ethan stood in front of his mirror, the man staring back at him barely recognizable. The tailored suit was gone. The watch that cost more than most people's cars lay untouched on the dresser. Instead, he wore an old wool coat, faded jeans, and a scarf that smelled faintly of dust from the back of his closet. For the first time in a decade, he looked ordinary. He slipped his phone into a drawer, left his wallet beside it, and took only a few crumpled bills from a forgotten jacket pocket. Then he walked through the silent halls of his mansion one last time, pausing only to look at the framed cityscape that once meant victory. It now just looked empty. In the garage, surrounded by his polished collection of luxury cars, his eyes fell on something covered with a grey sheet in the corner. He pulled it off, revealing a rusty, dented sedan, first car he ever bought. Long before the fame, back when he was still fixing computers out of a small apartment, the keys were still inside. He ran his hand over the cracked leather steering wheel, smiled faintly, and turned the ignition. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life like an old friend waking up after years of silence. As he drove away from the city, the skyline slowly faded behind him. The towers that once represented power grew smaller in the rearview mirror until they disappeared into the snowy haze. He didn't know exactly where he was going, just that he needed to go somewhere. No one knew his name. After an hour of driving through winding roads and flickering streetlights, he reached a small town tucked between frozen hills, where the Christmas lights were humble but glowing with warmth. He found a cheap roadside motel with a flickering neon sign that read "Rooms available." The clerk barely looked up when he handed over cash for a room. The walls were thin, the heater wheezed like an old man, and the bed creaked at the slightest touch. But for some strange reason, it felt more real than any luxury suite he'd ever stayed in. The next morning, the smell of freshly baked bread drifted through the cold air. Following it, Ethan found himself standing outside a small bakery with a wooden sign that read "Morales and Daughters." Inside, a woman with flour on her hands and kindness in her eyes was struggling to lift a heavy bag of flour. Without thinking, Ethan rushed forward and helped her set it on the counter. "Thank you," she said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You're not from around here, are you?" He shook his head. "Just passing through." "Well, passing through or not, that was kind of you." She smiled softly. "I'm Clara Morales. My daughters and I are preparing meals for some folks who can't afford a Christmas dinner. It's a small thing, but it matters." Ethan nodded, feeling something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. "It does matter," he said quietly. Clara packed a small paper bag, handed it to him, and said gently, "Here, it's just some leftover bread, but no one should be hungry on Christmas." Ethan stood there, speechless for a moment, watching her go back to work, humming softly as she dusted the counter with flour. He looked down at the warm bag in his hands, the simple gift of kindness from a stranger who had nothing to gain. Outside, snow began to fall again. He walked back to his motel, clutching that small paper bag like it was the most precious thing he'd ever owned. Ethan started showing up at the bakery every morning, at first just to say thank you for the bread, but soon his visits turned into hours. He swept the floors, carried boxes, delivered pastries around town. Clara tried to pay him once, but he refused with a smile. "I'm just helping out," he'd say, and she'd shake her head, pretending not to notice how his hands, once used to holding fountain pens and signing million-dollar deals, were now covered in flour and sugar. He began to live a rhythm he had never known before, waking up to the smell of coffee instead of deadlines, listening to the chatter of workers instead of the buzz of stock reports. There was no rush, no meetings, no status to maintain, just the sound of laughter, the clinking of dishes, and the soft hum of Christmas music playing from an old radio. For the first time, Ethan felt like part of something that didn't need a profit to have meaning. The people there thought he was just a kind drifter down on luck. One of the staff, an older man named Miguel, joked that Ethan looked like a poet who'd forgotten how to write. He laughed along, never revealing the truth. They shared stories over simple lunches, stories of families, struggles, and dreams that had nothing to do with money. Clara's daughters would tease him for burning cookies or miscounting change, and he'd play along, enjoying every second of this imperfect, ordinary life. One evening, as the last customers left, the lights flickered and went out. A sudden power outage wrapped the bakery in soft darkness. Clara found a few candles and lit them one by one, their warm glow bouncing off the walls. "Guess it's just us now," she said, smiling as she placed a candle on the counter. Ethan watched her move, her face glowing in the amber light, her hair dusted with flour like a snow halo. She sat down across from him, humming quietly while waiting for the power to return. The melody was faint, gentle, familiar. Ethan froze. His mother used to hum that exact song every Christmas Eve, the one about coming home for the holidays. For a moment, he couldn't speak. The flicker of candlelight danced over Clara's face, and something inside him broke open, a memory, a longing, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. She noticed the way he was looking at her and asked softly, "You know this song?" He nodded slowly. "My mother used to sing it." Clara smiled, her eyes tender. "Then I guess she's here with us tonight." Ethan said nothing. He just sat there, listening to her voice and the faint crackle of candle flames, realizing that somehow, in this small bakery in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by strangers in candlelight, he felt more at home than he ever did in his million-dollar mansion. Ethan had begun to believe that maybe he could start again, that maybe he didn't need wealth to feel rich. But one snowy morning, that fragile peace shattered. His assistant, Michael, had tracked him down after weeks of silence. The sleek black SUV looked out of place as it rolled into the small town. The windows tinted, the logo of Reed Technologies faintly reflecting in the glass. Ethan was standing outside the bakery stacking boxes when Michael stepped out, his breath fogging in the cold air. "Sir, thank God. You can't just vanish like this," he said. "The media's gone wild. There's a headline in every paper. Millionaire Ethan Reed missing. Investors are panicking." Ethan's stomach dropped. The townspeople who were nearby turned their heads, whispers rising like wind through dry leaves. Clara, who had just come out with a tray of cookies, froze. At first, she didn't understand, but when Michael said his full name again, "Mr. Reed, please, the board is waiting for you," everything inside her went still. She looked at Ethan, confusion and disbelief spreading across her face. "Ethan Reed," she repeated, as in the Ethan Reed, the billionaire who owns half the city. He tried to explain, stepping closer, his voice low. "Clara, I didn't want anyone to treat me differently. I just wanted to see what life was like without," but she cut him off, her voice trembling with anger and betrayal. "Without what? Without honesty, without telling the truth. Was all this some kind of experiment? Were we just your little Christmas project?" People began gathering around, customers, workers, children from the neighborhood, all staring at him like he was some stranger who had been pretending all along. Clara's eyes were bright with hurt. "You let me think you were someone struggling, someone real. You listened to our stories, you sat at our table, and all this time, you were just watching us." Ethan shook his head. "No, Clara, I swear, that's not it. I wasn't pretending to mock anyone. I wanted to remember what it meant to be human again." But she turned away, her voice cracking. "You had to play poor to learn how to be human. You don't even hear how sad that sounds." The crowd stayed quiet, waiting. Ethan tried again, softer this time. "Clara, please," but she wouldn't meet his eyes. She set down the tray she was holding and whispered, "Get out, Ethan, just go." The words hit him harder than any accusation. Snow began to fall again, covering the street in white silence. He looked around at the people who had once smiled at him every morning, now staring with disappointment, and for the first time, the weight of his choices truly sank in. That night, he packed his few belongings and left the motel. The roads were empty, the snow thick against the windshield, blurring the world outside. As the lights of the town faded behind him, he whispered to himself, "I finally found something real, and I lost it." The wipers moved back and forth, the engine hummed, but inside, there was only silence, the kind that comes when everything you didn't know you needed slips away forever. Back in the city, Ethan's penthouse felt emptier than ever. The lights were too bright, the silence too heavy. Every polished surface reflected a man who suddenly hated his own reflection. The party planners had already decorated the grand hall for his annual Christmas gala. Crystal chandeliers, silver cutlery, a tree so tall it nearly brushed the ceiling. But he stood there, staring at it all, and whispered, "Cancel it." His assistant blinked in confusion. "Sir, the guests cancel everything," Ethan repeated quietly. "Send them home, all of them." When the staff left, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't loneliness he felt, it was guilt. He walked to his office and opened his computer, staring at the number on the screen, his annual Christmas bonus fund, meant for investors and executives. Then, without hesitation, he transferred every dollar to a small-town community fund, under the name Morale's Bakery Relief. The system asked for a confirmation signature, and as he typed his name, his throat tightened. "I thought pretending to be poor would teach me humility," he murmured to himself, "but I didn't know it would teach me love." Days passed, but he couldn't rest. The city, with all its luxury, had never felt so cold. So he began planning something else, something that didn't involve profit or reputation. Quietly, without telling anyone, Ethan started a project under Clara's name, a community kitchen built in her town, right under her bakery, offering free meals for anyone who needed them. He made sure no one could trace it back to him. The blueprints were titled the Morales Foundation, a place for everyone. He even added a small note to the file, in honor of kindness freely given. As the snow fell outside, Ethan stood by his window watching the city lights blur into a soft, glowing sea. For the first time in years, the sound of silence didn't hurt, it felt like peace, the kind that comes when you finally do something right. Back in the small town, Clara was closing up the bakery when the mailman arrived with an envelope. It wasn't fancy, just plain white, with her name typed neatly on it. Inside was a letter and a donation receipt for a community kitchen fund. At the bottom, barely visible under the signature line, were two words that made her heart stop. Ethan Reed. She stood there, snow swirling outside, her breath catching as she realized what he had done. He hadn't disappeared to escape her, he'd been trying to make things right. Christmas Eve came again, quiet and cold, the kind of night where the world feels slower, softer. Clara had decided to keep things simple that year, just a small dinner for the bakery staff, a few candles, laughter, and warmth. The tables were covered in red cloth, The scent of cinnamon and fresh bread filled the air, and everyone spoke in that gentle, tired tone people use when they've worked hard but feel content. She tried to stay present, to smile, but a part of her still carried that empty ache she didn't like to name. As the clock neared 9, the bakery door opened, letting in a gust of cold air in a shadow that froze her. Ethan stood in the doorway, not in a suit this time, not in the image of the man the world called a millionaire, just a coat, simple shoes, and eyes that carried the kind of humility no amount of money could fake. The room fell silent. Even the music seemed to fade. He took a hesitant step forward. "I didn't come as a millionaire this time," he said softly. "I came as a man who finally understands what matters." Clara's breath caught. For a moment, no one moved. Then she nodded toward the empty chair beside her. "You look cold. Sit down." He did, carefully, like someone afraid the chair might read you that now. "When he walked away, I thought I lost you, but what I really lost was myself a long time ago. I thought success would fill the silence, but it only made it louder." She watched him, her expression softening. "Do you know what love really wants?" she asked. He looked at him. The others began to eat again, conversation slowly returning, though everyone's eyes kept drifting back to them. Ethan looked around the bakery, the flickering candles, the small tree in the corner with crooked ornaments, the warmth that no chandelier in his mansion could ever imitate. "I miss this," he said quietly. "Not the food or the lights, the feeling." Clara folded her hands. "You can't buy that, Ethan. You can only show up for it." He nodded. "I, not her, waiting. It doesn't care what you own," she said. "It cares how you show up." The words settled between them like snow, quiet, pure, undeniable. Ethan reached across the small, forgiving smile spreading across her FAQ table, his hand trembling slightly as it brushed hers. "Then let me show up. Not just tonight, every day, in every way I can." Clara's eyes shimmered, reflecting the candlelight. She squeezed his hand gently. "Then you're already halfway there." Someone turned the music up again, a slow, nostalgic tune. Ethan stood and held out his hand to her. "Dance with me," he asked. She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. They moved slowly between the tables, the world outside disappearing as snow began to drift past the window. For a moment, it felt like time had paused. The hum of laughter, the glow of lights, and two hearts finding their rhythm again. As the song played, Clara rested her head against his shoulder. Ethan closed his eyes, breathing her in, and then he heard a soft melody his mother used to hum every Christmas, playing faintly through the old speaker in the corner. He smiled, a tear slipping down his cheek. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe it was something more. But in that moment, standing there with her in the light of the bakery, he knew he had finally come home. 1 year later, the same town that had once whispered about the missing millionaire, now whispered about something else, a miracle that smelled like coffee and bread. The Morales bakery had grown into something more than a shop. It was a home. The windows glowed every morning with golden light. Laughter spilled onto the street, and the sign above the door now read Morales and Reed. Inside, Clara moved between tables, greeting customers, while Ethan stood behind the counter in an apron, flour on his sleeves, handing out pastries with the kind of joy no boardroom could ever give him. He still owned his company, but it wasn't the same. A large part of it had turned into a foundation that funded small-town bakeries, bookstores, and family businesses, places where dreams didn't need millions to matter. He called it the Hearth Project, because he'd learned that the heart of every home was warmth, not wealth. Every Christmas season, he closed his city office and came back here, trading meetings for dough, numbers for names, profits for people. On this particular morning, Clara caught him wiping the counter for the third time and laughed. "You know, for someone who once ran an empire, you're oddly obsessed with crumbs." He grinned, brushing a bit of flour from his face. "It's quality control." She handed him a mug of coffee, and together they looked around the bakery full of families, music, children drawing on napkins, the smell of sugar and cinnamon everywhere. "This," she said softly, "is what love builds." He looked at her, smiling. "And it only took me losing everything to find it." As the clock struck 9, the first snowflakes began to fall outside, glistening against the window. Ethan walked to the door, flipped the close sign to open, and greeted the first customers with a genuine smile. "Merry Christmas," he said, handing a little girl a cookie shaped like a star. The child giggled, and something in that sound filled the room with quiet magic. The narrator's voice lingers softly as the camera pans out, Ethan behind the counter, Clara beside him, laughter echoing through the warm, golden room. "He once built a world with walls of glass and gold. Now he builds one with warmth and bread, because love's richest currency is kindness. The doorbell rings again. A gust of winter air sweeps in, and as Ethan looks up, smiling at the next customer, the screen fades slowly to white. 1 year later, the same town that once pitied the lonely stranger now celebrated the man who had changed their lives. The snow fell softly that morning, coating the rooftops in white as the smell of freshly baked bread drifted through the streets. Inside the bakery, now twice its old size, Ethan and Clara moved in quiet rhythm, as if they'd been doing this their whole lives. He wore a simple apron, hands dusted with flour, hair a little grayer but eyes full of peace. She stood beside him, humming softly while decorating a tray of pastries for the Christmas crowd that was already forming outside. The bell over the door jingled as the first customers entered, shaking snow from their coats. Ethan looked up, smiling. "Merry Christmas, everyone. Come in, it's warm." His voice carried the same warmth that once only existed in other people's homes. He poured coffee, served bread, helped a little boy fix his mitten. To anyone walking in, he was just another man working behind the counter, and that's exactly how he wanted it. The bakery was no longer just a place to eat. It had become a heartbeat of the town. The laughter of neighbors, the smell of cinnamon, the hum of an old record player, it all blended together into something that felt like home. And above the register hung a small plaque that read, "Sweetheart Foundation, because kindness is worth more than gold." Ethan had turned part of his company into a foundation that helped small businesses in struggling towns, bake flower shops, little stores like Clara's used to be. Every month, another town got its second chance. Every month, another family smiled again as the sun rose higher. Clara wiped her hands on her apron and joined Ethan at the counter. "You know," she said softly, "you never told me what you think love really means." He smiled, leaning closer. "I think it's this," he said, looking around. "The laughter, the smell of bread, you. It's building something real, one kind word at a time." Outside, children ran past the windows, leaving trails of footprints in the snow. The bell chimed again as more people entered, filling the bakery with warmth and chatter. Ethan stepped out from behind the counter, greeting everyone personally, his heart lighter than it had ever been. He once built a world with walls of glass and gold, but now he built one with warmth and bread, because love's richest currency is kindness. The camera lingers on him for a moment. Ethan Reed, the man who once tried to buy happiness, now giving it away one loaf at a time. Clara slides her hand into his, and together they look out at the falling snow through the window, their reflections framed by the golden light of their bakery. The world outside is cold, but inside, everything glows.